Hey, what's good with y'all, man? It's your boy J Money Pride. In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to understand how compression works. Usually when people are producing, if they've been producing for a long time, they will typically use compression, Now, what I will say is this, compression is not something that you need to use every single time you are producing. However, it is simply something that, if you feel like you need it, use it. One of the things that I feel like it's best used for, at least for what I'm going to be showing you guys in this video, is simply how to tame the peaks and basically keep it consistent. Keep whatever it is consistent. So if it's vocals, vocals, for example, you might be moving forward and backwards and stuff. Not you, but like the artist maybe. And if you make your own music as a musician, you may do the same thing. You may have like you may play an instrument, and like you may play something in like a guitar, for example, and you want to tame some of those peaks because some things might sound a little too low and then some things might sound a little too loud. So having a compressor would basically set where things start and how much it's doing it, and you'll basically keep it like this. That's the best way I can visually show you guys. So just like the last video when I talked about bus route and sends, you guys want to know what compression does. Well, again, compression simply, it compresses a signal, meaning it sort of squashes the dynamics. If you don't compress, you have like a lot of dynamic range, right? But the more you compress, the tighter it gets. So that's why it works a lot differently than a limiter, which simply acts as like a brick wall. Anything that passes it starts to distort. All right, so first, let's go over these parameters. So I simply loaded up the project that we use for the buses and routes tutorial, because it could still work the same here. So I'm gonna use my mix bus, which I connected these buses and sends to, and what I'm gonna do is open up my H comp, which is a compressor. It's a vintage compressor from Waves. And again, this is something, some of these parameters, I picked this compressor because of the parameters that it has. The only ones you're not gonna really have to worry about too much is the analog and then the mix knob. You can use this, I'll talk about this in a little bit. But you also see that it has a limiter option as well, but we're gonna just stay on the compressor side. Okay, so the key elements you're gonna want to look for is the ratio, your punch, which will be your knee. Some compressors say knee, some says punch, whatever. Attack, release, and your output, which will be basically your makeup gain. Okay, so within this compressor, now you see that we have some elements which regular compressors usually have. You're going to see these things. Depending on the kind of compressor it is, I'll get into that in another video, where you have tube compressors and FET compressors and vari-mule compressors and things of that nature, and how they operate. Sometimes they're not different than the typical compressor. Now the analog on this is just simply for that colored feel, or like, that vintage warmth that you would get from the compressor itself, to emulate a compressor from back in the day. So yeah, now before you get into actually applying compression, sometimes people play around with the parameters and stuff like that, and that's cool. Still do that, because you're gonna have to learn how to find a sweet spot for pretty much every track you do. Nothing is gonna stay the same, I'm gonna tell you that now. So you're always gonna have to end up coming back and tweaking things, even if you have a template. Sometimes that's just how it works. So what is the threshold? The biggest knob on the plugin. Well, the threshold is the level at which the compression is like it begins. So what that means is, if you have a certain level and audio passes this level, compression is going to act on that. If it's under it, it's not going to have to worry about anything because it's under it. Anything that's over, like above it, is going to get brought down here, and so what that does is tighten the dynamic range, and it also keeps a consistent audio, a consistent sound, because nothing is just extremely jumpy, right? That's what the threshold does. So again, it's the level at which compression initiates once something passes that level, once a signal exceeds this level. So right now it's set to -18, but my track is way louder than -18, especially since I have an 808 in here. So this is what it would sound like. So you notice it jumped all the way back here. Well, that's because of how much reduction it's been done, that's been done due to how far back the threshold is set. So if we turn this up around 7.0, right? Negative 7.0. That's cool. You'll still notice the compression, and I want to keep it where it's pretty noticeable because I'm going to be talking about a couple of the other parameters, and I need you to see how far it's moving and things of that nature. So this is what it sounds like now. Still, I can definitely tell it's a little bit like dippy, which is cool for the sake of the video. But now you see how far back it's moving. Now we want to look at the next thing. Threshold, we now know, is that if an audio exceeds the level of your ceiling, it's going to compress it down. This is the beginning of it all, right? Now you have your attack. The attack is how fast or slow the compression acts upon the signal that passed the threshold. So the threshold is what initiates the compression, and then the attack is how fast or slow that compression happens. So if we turn this all the way up, you'll notice that this goes pretty slow up. Let's take a listen. So, because of how slow it was, and because of the low amount of compression I'm doing, the attack isn't really trying to budge like that. Now, if I put it faster, you'll notice that it does jump up quite much, but it's very fast to how it goes up. Let's take a listen. So you seen that when I put it up all the way to 0.5 milliseconds, it was super snappy and it went all the way up, but it was super fast how it did it. And as you see me change this parameter and make it a little bit slower, you notice that it went up a little slower. So now we understand the attack and the threshold. Well, now you probably can figure out what the release is. If the attack is for the beginning of the compression, the release will be for the end of the compression. Once it finishes handling what it felt like it needed to handle, it has to come back down. This is when you see this meter go back down to 0. Right now it's set to 100 milliseconds. If we put this all the way to 3000 milliseconds, you'll notice that this is going to go down super slow. Let's take a listen. So you notice that this meter went down, like it was slow as Christmas, Actually, let me make this slightly bigger. Let's put it to, yeah, perfect. All right, so now you see that this is very slow. But if I turn this all the way up, watch what happens. So now you see that it's a lot more snappier, right? Now the release and the attack go hand in hand. So, you want to set a certain attack and then the release has to make sense. If you have a fast attack, let's see what a slower release sounds like. No, if you have a slower attack, what would a faster release sound like? sounds good. And then that's pretty much about it. So the threshold is the level that you set that initiates the compression. The moment audio or any signal exceeds it, the attack is how fast or slow it reacts to compress, and then the release is how fast or slow it calms back down before the next peak hits, right? So that's these first three down here. Now you want to understand punch, or the knee. This knob is mainly used for like drums and things of that nature, because the nature of it basically lets the transient pass through more prominently within the track, which is good for drums because you don't want to lose a lot of the dynamics within your drums. The drums can sound super weak if you compress too much. Even sometimes if you compress just a little bit more than a little, it's still gonna sound a little weird sometimes. I know a lot of the people that get into like the trap beats and hip hop beats and stuff, you're gonna be like, what the heck is this? And then you're never gonna want to use compression again because of that. But I'm telling you now, compression is actually a really good thing to know about and to use when you're mixing. This is also a pretty transparent control, so even if I turn this up, if you aren't really that experienced with compression, you're probably not even going to notice much, because it's really affecting things that's like this 808, so that's pretty much what the punch or the knob knee is doing. Now the next thing is the ratio. This is like super important to know about. Super important. So the ratio basically refers to how much compression is being applied once the signal exceeds the threshold. So like basically, for example, if we move this up, you're going to notice that it's probably going to be a bit more dramatic on the compression. So let's turn this up like 8.50. Again, because we aren't making this extremely dramatic with the compression, it's going to sound a little bit like, if you don't understand how to hear compression, you probably won't really hear it like that. But visually, you can see it. If I turn this all the way down to a ratio of 1, you're going to notice that this doesn't really move as much as compared to when I put it all the way over here to 50. Now, do you want it to be 50 to 1? No, that's usually when you get into the limiter kind of stuff. You're going to keep it probably within this little range here, 4 to 1 is good. 3 to 1 is good. 2 to 1 is good. 1 to 1 is good. 1 to 1 is almost like you're not compressing at all. Now, the way you can understand how compression, like that you did compression right, is that you don't really hear it unless you intentionally want it to be heard, like you completely squashed the mess out of a snare or something like that. But you don't want it to be that noticeable. You want it to sound like that is professional, right? So we're gonna turn this down a little bit to like maybe -4.5, and then here we're gonna like let's play around with it, because that's what this is about. You want to experiment with these things, because nothing is going to be just absolute. You don't want to use your eyes all the time. You want to use your ears, so let's get into it. Now we're going to do a bypass and then, enable, just to see the difference that's being made. Let's move this about here. We can also check our levels here as well. Let's see. So notice how when I had this bypassed, it actually showed the meter that it was louder, right? You know, and then when I compressed it, it stayed within that 0 dB, right? That's because of this compression. This is bringing it down by the negative 4.5, right? You know, so if I play this again and I bypass it, look at that. There's peaks going above. But if I compress it, it's getting squashed. And you can see that 4.5 getting reduced right there in that little yellow line. So that's something good to look into. And then obviously if I compress this a lot more, you know, very dramatic compress, look at that. Look at all that. Now when it's off, it's still going up based on what I have my parameters set to. But when I enable it again, it's very, very compressed. So that's a cool thing to understand, and like I said, just mess around with compression. Now, to gain perceived loudness, you can get that perceived loudness by simply upping your makeup gain. Another way makeup gain is used is pretty much after the compression has been made. Usually, again, you lose dynamics. That's going to happen. Sometimes it's just, you know, depending on how tight or loose you're compressing the signal. You're going to sometimes lose some dynamic range, and losing dynamic range could also result in losing that perceived loudness. What is perceived loudness, you say? Well, perceived loudness is basically, well, I guess that's in the name. It's the perceived loudness in which you pick up from your ears. It's not actually that loud. It's not actually that loud, but due to how the compression squashes those dynamics, you could make it sound louder than it actually is. And using this is a good way of getting, you know, a pretty loud mix or a loud master, you know. So having the right compression settings for that track, where as long as you're not ruining any of your drums or instruments and stuff like that, you could get some good, you know, gain out of your track, you know, some good volume out of your track without actually destroying it, without adding a ton of limiters and, you know, things of that nature that adds distortion. So, you know, I could turn this up to 2.2 and you'll see that the compression over here on this mix bus is showing like much more, you know, than it did before when I had it just at 0. It's a lot more. I can also take it up even more. Now that's a bit too dramatic, you know, and in that case I would have to tweak some other stuff to get that to sound pretty good. It added a tad bit of distortion just because it was like being extremely like pushed, you know. And then I have my punch up too, so it's pretty noticeable that it's like trying to maintain the transients. But anyways, I'm gonna like just turn this back down to 0 and peep this. It's what it used to be. But look at this blue meter. This is the real meter. The yellow meter is just the compression, right? I turn this up. Hear it? All right, so now we understand how to release, attack, threshold, punch or knee, ratio, and your output or makeup gain works. If I play this and I bypass it, you'll notice that the makeup gain is obviously off because the compressor will be off, but you'll notice that the track sounds lower, but the levels appear higher. I'll actually load up my meter as well so you can see this. Can I keep this on screen? Yes. Okay. So let's play around with this. Now this is with this on. This is hitting 0 dB, right? And then what I'm gonna do is bypass it. Let's see how loud it is. So if you notice, we ended up going into the positives. We went above 0 dB. What is this going to do in the long term? Well, after, you know, it sounds fine to me, you know, at first, you know, but once you get into a space where it's, when you get into like, when you send this to a mix engineer and he has to record vocals on these kind of things, he's going to notice that first, that like, wow, this is like got a crazy dynamic range, but it's very much going to be in the way during the mastering process as well, because now it's like, okay, this guy did not do any compression whatsoever. He did nothing, you know, and then I might have saturation going on and stuff like that as well, using a bunch of vintage stuff. So it's just adding, you know, to it actually being louder than what it sounds like to you. So then you're going to go ahead in your project and do stuff that makes it sound louder to you, and then your meter is going to be shooting way above 0 dB, and you don't want nothing to be going above 0 dB. Even mastered tracks that you hear on the radio are loud, and they're probably still not even 0 dB. They might be like, you know, negative 0.1, you know, like, but they're not going to be a full 2 decibels above, you know. It shouldn't be showing like this. One 1.2, 2.6, you know, you don't want those. So I got more volume out of, you know, and it's consistent. It's not constantly switching. But pay attention to the dynamic range too. If I turn this off, so it's good. Now, obviously, you could mess around with, you know, your actual knobs, knobs and stuff like that, because this is important as well. You know, before you even get into compression or limiting or even just mixing in general, you want to make sure that you have your levels set properly. Now, I did quite a job with that kind of thing when I started this video for the buses and sends, because I simply wanted to show you guys how buses and sends operate. But if I really spent time and try to like make sure this was like, you know, a good, like everything was balanced perfectly, and, you know, made sure I EQ'd everything, you know, and I just like went through the whole like process, the whole rigmarole, you know, the compression would be a lot more noticeable for that kind of thing. Now I can actually load up a different one. Let's load up SSL bus cop. All right, so in this compressor, let me actually make this bigger. This is a good compressor for gluing things together. Now this is a master bus compressor. Usually want to throw this on buses, you know. Now I put this on the perk bus because maybe let's try to tweak something with that. Now you see we have our threshold, makeup gain, attack, release, ratio. We have our trim, which is literally like your sort of like your input, and then we have our saturation, which we don't need to worry about. So threshold, let's take a listen to our perks. Now, the lower I put this, the more it's being compressed. You can see it on the meter. Gonna put it about negative 2.4. Now, Occasionally, you want to bypass this and enable it just to hear what's going on. Now, obviously, without it, it sounds a lot louder right now. Once we put it on, the dynamics gets tightened to a more consistent sound. Now, we're going to mess with the attack. 0.1 milliseconds, 30 milliseconds. When we put the attack slower, it allowed letting a lot of those transients pass through. The faster we put it, the more reactive it is, the more snappy it is. Look at that. When I put it more up here, it lets a lot more pass through. So we're going to have it about 10 milliseconds just to have some pretty good snappy compression without it taking over too much of the percussions. Next, we're going to set release. Now, a lot of compressors have an auto section. Auto is good if you just, I mean, it works most of the time. It just basically adapts to whatever the track is and tries to create a level for it that's perfect for that specific track. Sometimes it doesn't work like that, and sometimes you just want to experiment yourself. So let's experiment ourselves and see what we ultimately like. Let's put it to -1. See how fast it's coming back down? Let's put it to 1 to 2 seconds. 1.2 seconds, I'm sorry. Look how slow it's going back down. Now let's assess the situation. This looks like it's letting a lot more pass through, and it sounds like it is. Let's try auto. Sounds good. It sounds almost like the same thing as the -1, and it might very well be -1. Sorry. So let's have it at 0.3. 0.3 sounds good. Now again, let's bypass it. Let's also pay attention to this perk bus meter. It's hitting about that -3.4. Hold on. Wait. Let's actually make a meter here and track it. Yeah, about -5.9, -4.8. It's around there, right? Let's open this compressor up. Hit it. Okay, cool. All right, so now we're going to turn it back on. Look at that. See how much we saved? And it sounds the exact same. So what if you still want to bring this up, right? Use makeup gain. Let's get those decibels back. Now it sounds even louder, right? Let's bypass this again. So essentially what you're doing is you're compressing, and then that's bringing the levels down, but it still sounds equal, and then you simply bring up the makeup gain to gain the volume that you lost. So your perceived loudness of this is going to sound even louder than it does when it's not compressed. So we're going to close out on these, and now let us play it. Let's also mess with this ratio here. 4.1 might 4 to 1 might be a little bit more much. You notice 10 to 1 made it even more tighter. Let's do 2. Alright, so that's about it for this video. Now you guys understand how compression works, what the parameters mean, what they do. You got a chance to hear what it sounds like. Now here's where the experience comes in. So you need to understand how to hear the compression, because just knowing what they do is good. It's good to know, but now you need to understand how to hear it, because there's going to be situations where you're mixing a project, whether it's your own beats or vocals, or you might be recording someone as an engineer, or mixing and mastering, whatever it is you're doing, where you need to use compression. You need to understand, again, not everything needs to be compressed, and if it does, how much does it need to be? You know, is it that necessary that it has to be super squashed, right? If you can't hear compression properly, you're only going to really notice things when it's obviously noticeable. But again, you can compress stuff where it's extremely subtle. Someone could say they compress something and you would have no idea, because you are expecting it to sound like it's getting like pressed, you know, and it doesn't have to be like that. You know, it can be very, very transparent, very, very sort of undercover. I'm J Money Prod, and I'm glad I was able to talk to you guys about compression. Maybe another video I can do EQ or a different, you know, plugin, sort of masterclass kind of thing. And obviously later down the line, I'll come out with an advanced video on different compressors, like you know, not just a regular compressor, because some of them operate slightly different. Some of them might be slightly differently reactive. But again, these are all things you just have to play around with and experiment with as well. So yeah. All right, guys, if you guys like this video and want more videos like this, make sure to hit the like, comment, subscribe, turn post notifications on, all that good stuff. I also post on my Instagram and TikTok as well, with my the shorts and the reels and stuff like that. Yeah, go follow me on those as well. I'll have all the links dropped down below, and I'll see y'all guys in the next video. Peace.